deceased financier Jeffrey Epstein is dead.
I made immediate and repeated efforts to save Mary Jo by diving into the strong and murky current.
Just as jellyfish and woodpeckers and ostriches have no rights, Homo sapiens have no rights also.
Who masters those technologies in some way will be the master of them.
Average house prices in Dublin, €509,000.
Is that others pointed out this excess death started and correlates with the vaccine program.
In 1932, seeking to study untreated syphilis in black men, doctors from the United States Public Health Service recruited subjects in Macon County, Alabama.
A set of human bones recovered from the wreckage of the Sewol ferry has been confirmed to be one of the students considered missing since the ferry sank in 2014.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the North of Richmond podcast. My name is Haley St. John. And I also have my co-host Shane here. We forgot to introduce ourselves last episode, and so we're going to take a second to do that. I'm Haley St. John, also known as the Criminal Element on TikTok. And Shane, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm not going to give my last name, but I'm Shane. And basically, I decided to help Haley produce this podcast after producing Patriot News Network for the last year and a half, or 2.5 years, sorry. Came back for another hoorah.
Heck yeah, man. Heck yeah. And I think we're doing a pretty good job. This is only episode 2, but of the podcast specifically. And I know we had a few questions, at least I got a few questions as to how our podcast is going to work. And so I wanted to kind of let you guys know a little bit. So the way that we're going to work is we're a deep dive true political crime podcast. And so what that means is every episode is going to be a progression of a story that we've plucked out of history to tell you that we think have or may have criminal intent or crimes having been committed during the story. So right now we're covering Ted Kennedy and his life, the way he grew up, and the Chappaquiddick incident involving Mary Jo Kopechne that happened in 1969. So please note that any information relayed in these retellings has been gathered with much attention to detail, to the best of our knowledge and capability, and any opinions expressed hereafter are ours alone. We reserve the right to disclaim that our research has been done through internet sources, history books, encyclopedias, newspapers and articles, and clips, and social media. Any incorrect or iffy information will be notated during the progression of each episode to the best of our ability, and no action should be taken in any way, legal or otherwise, based on the information relayed here. That being said, some details, as stated, may be incorrect or unconfirmed, and if you so choose, please feel free to correct them in the comments section of this video, as we are all here to learn, or you can reach out to us at northofrichmondpod@gmail.com and just give us a shout out. Tell us what you thought about the episode. Tell us what you thought about what we covered, and if you have any case suggestions of political crimes that you think we should cover, you can also send those to our emails. So, yeah. I think last week we established just how well the Kennedy family had become connected by the time Ted Kennedy was born. Joseph, his father, had garnered so many political and leadership connections that he even was able to have Ted's first communion delivered by Pope Pius XII. And I'm not sure if it was just Ted that this had happened with, or if the other Kennedy children also had this happen. Either way, this was a family of influence and power, despite Joseph's Nazi sympathies that we mentioned last week. I mentioned that Ted had attended many different schools by the time the family had relocated to England for Joseph's U.S. ambassadorship to the U.K., and we know this kind of thing can have an effect on a child's education and mental state. As the youngest son, Ted really felt his older siblings' achievements overshadowed his own, and he mentioned this in interviews over the years. Ted really said that he really liked sports over education, and this caused his academics to not really be up to the same standard as his siblings. But being the youngest, often parents dote on their youngest children more than the rest, and this seems to be the case with Ted, as it's said that he was closer with both of his parents than his siblings were. And he was able to get away with more things, which is just, of course, the youngest kid always gets away with everything. For instance, Ted had stated that his parents growing up, especially his mother, encouraged intellectual conversation during family meals and such. So he would often have things to speak about, or he would often have to speak about politics or books or things he'd learned or read in school. But being that his academics were not on the same level, he found himself really becoming somewhat of a family comedian during these times. I'm sure there were many situations where making a joke instead of intellectually responding due to ignorance of a subject very much became a form of self-defense for him. And I think that we can all say that we've had situations where that has happened to us too. So it is what it is. We're trying to make this story relatable for you. So weigh in the comments if you've ever had a situation where you felt ignorant on a subject, and so instead of responding, you made a joke. It happens to the best of us. But what do you think, Shane? Have you ever been in a situation like that? Uh-oh, Shane, your mic's off.
That happens, and I'm sorry, guys. It's not going to get cut out of this because it's kind of entertaining to see the mistakes as we grow as a podcast.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, even you and I have had conversations where we've been having these intellectual conversations, and you're like, "Well, what do you think about this?" And then I don't know enough about it, so I make a joke. And it's usually at a politician's expense.
Of course, because those are the best jokes, right? It doesn't matter what side, guys. Don't come for me in the comments, okay? Political jokes are the best ones.
Well, and it's kind of like you said just a short while ago about me having a dry sense of humor. And I found that kind of funny because I fired right back, and I'm like, that's why I carry a bucket of water around. kind of a humorous.
Feel free to use
outtake,
that, guys. That's a true dad joke.
It is kind of a humorous outtake, but the reality is sometimes when you're in the trenches and you're having these conversations, when you're trying to fill all the stuff or fill in time between thought processes, it's easier to make a joke than let dead air just sit there. And that's
Right.
basically where, for me, it's actually kind of fun. And there's some humorous uptake.
Oh, I'm sure. Right. But anywho, I'm sure everyone is wondering where we are in the timeline. So let's get back into the story here. So while Joseph Sr. is not the main subject for us anymore, he will continue to make appearances. So let's bring it back just a little bit. And I would like to talk about Ted's oldest sister, Rosemary Kennedy. I've heard her name said Rosemarie, and I've also heard it said Rosemary. I think in the last episode I referred to her as Rosemarie, but then I realized and learned that she was most commonly referred to as Rosemary, so that's going to be the name that we use from here on out. It's said that when Rosemary was born, the doctor was running late, and Rosemary was born in 1918, guys, so you have to remember that, okay? So the doctor's running late. The nurses are telling Rose, her mother, to keep her legs closed until the doctor arrived. Now, if you've ever been through childbirth, you know that this is practically impossible. Your body will do everything it needs to in order to birth your child. And this type of medical intervention can be extremely detrimental for not only the mother, but the baby especially. It's said that Rosemary was stuck in her mother's birth canal for over 2 hours before the doctor arrived, which created significant oxygen deprivation for Rosemary. And as her early childhood years passed, it was very obvious that this had caused some mental disabilities and developmental delays. As she grew up, she'd experience seizures and violent outbursts and mood swings. But Joseph and his wife made sure that none of this was shown to the public because that was the idea back then. That was just the commonly accepted societal practice, was you just don't talk about it, right? So this wasn't shown to the public to the best of their capability, even going so far as to present her as a debutante in King George VI court in England in 1938, during which the poor thing tripped and fell. And I have a son who's mentally challenged and special needs. I do not like this one bit. I thought this was rather disgusting. No offense to the Kennedy family in saying that, but nowadays the stigma is very different surrounding mental health. But I just did not. I felt like this was degrading in a way, if that makes sense. So at certain points in her life, she was whisked away to boarding schools and convents, so she was out of the public eye. And then 1941 rolls around, and doctors suggested psychosurgery, lobotomy. This was the first tragedy of the Kennedy curse, and Ted was 9 years old when this lobotomy was performed on Rosemary. And it failed, and she was left pretty much a vegetable with the mental capacity of a 2-year-old, really no longer able to speak or really walk at all or do anything for herself anymore. And because of this, it was almost as if she had died, because when the lobotomy failed, Joseph and Rose secretly decided to have her institutionalized, first in New York for several years, then to Jefferson, Wisconsin. And I want you guys to note that though we're kind of going a little bit in depth into Rosemary's story here, we do plan on doing an entire series on Rosemary's situation, as well as several others. Just kind of going over the medical and social stigma surrounding mental health, just sometime soon. It might not be the next episode, it might be a few episodes or a few series down, but we do plan on doing a deep dive into the mental health system and how it came to be what it is today. So they whisk her off to Jefferson, Wisconsin, and then they chose not to be fully candor with the rest of the children about what exactly they had done to her. Some sources say that the rest of the Kennedy children didn't find out about the lobotomy for 20 years. 20 years. And it's said that this experience really solidified Ted's stance on mental health and the importance of proper mental care in his political career. Ted's sister Eunice actually went on to found the Special Olympics after finding out about Rosemary's full story. And the Kennedy children each worked hard to change the stigma surrounding mental health as a whole. After Rosemary's failed lobotomy, life went on. She had a freaking lobotomy, and nobody knew for like ever. Could you imagine your parents doing that to one of your siblings and just not telling you?
It's really. Let's rewind back to what the times were, though. It was a very verboten thing to even have any mental health stigma or mental health issues at all in the family. And to see a family with that much power and that much social clout, you kind of would expect to see something of this sort, but not this bad. And for those people who don't know what lobotomies are, it is basically a surgery that it's a brain surgery. And they used it to treat various mental health issues. They thought that it would work for seizures, epileptic seizures to be exact. And it basically involves severing connections within the sorry, I'm speaking way too fast for myself. Prefrontal cortex. So this failed and left her basically a vegetable. And we've been in contact with some people that know a thing or two about this specific incident. And hopefully we can get some more information for that episode that you were talking about. That's going to do more of a deep dive into what happened. So that's definitely going to be an episode to look out for. It is one of many in the Kennedy things that I think we could actually do breakout episodes on in regards to a lot of the criminality. And I mean, it wasn't even criminal to see this happen back then. That's a bad part. But it gave rise to a lot of like the Americans with Disabilities Act and the various other acts that came that are dealing with mental health and, I mean, even just your disability for people with disabilities. So
Exactly. And I have somebody who we can talk to, certified ADA advocate on TikTok, if you guys want to go give him a follow. This is his specialty. He teaches people how to work with the ADA and their disabilities. So I'm going to talk to him when we're ready to do that episode, and we'll be able to get some extremely good quality insight into how the ADA works and, kind of some of the history as well. So I'm excited for that when we get to do that.
And I think it's going to be sooner rather than later because let's face it, we are in an election year, and it seems like you see, and this is kind of getting a little off topic, and I'm gonna end my commentary in this aspect after this, but we're in a political season. We are every year or every 4 years we see hyper partisanship on both sides. And when there's hyper partisanship, there's also a huge spike in mental health issues, and that's across the board.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there are going to be things that we go through in this episode that for adults is going to be quite triggering because of what they've been
Yeah.
through with a Kennedy assassination and different things like that. So anytime you guys ever feel like you need to reach out, definitely reach out, get the help that you need, because quite honestly, there's no shame in it.
No, not at all. Not at all. Thanks, Shane. You are awesome. Okay. So after Rosemary's failed lobotomy, life went on. Ed's older brother, Joseph Kennedy Jr., joined the war effort, enlisting in the United States Navy as a pilot. Joseph was already pegged to become the first Catholic president of the United States, with high ambitions to run for the House of Representatives eventually. And just to let you all know, Joseph Jr. also shared his father's Nazi sympathies, even going so far as to praise Hitler's eugenics programs, stating that it was a, quote, great thing that will do away with many disgusting specimens of men, end quote. Little did he know that one of those people was his own sister, Rosemary, that people wanted to eradicate. But I digress. Regardless of his beliefs, he still served America, making it all the way to lieutenant just before he was eligible to go home. Joseph Jr., however, chose to stay, joining Operation Aphrodite. This was a military operation plan to use bombers to take out enemy targets using B-17s and other styles of airplanes equipped with bombs, converting the planes to remote control so that they could guide them to crash the bomb into the target. And this would be done after the pilots had already left the plane. So they would do what they needed to do, they'd pull the pin, and then they'd jump out of the plane. Now, Joseph Jr. was actually on the very first flight of this operation on August 12th, 1944. And Shane, if you want to put up that next photo, this next photo is actually the last known photograph taken. Oh, not that one, I guess. That's with him and his dad, Joseph. But there's one in there that was his last known photo before he died. But according to this, the first flight happened on August 12th, 1944. And according to documentation of the flight through firsthand accounts, Joseph Jr. and his co-pilot Willie were flying a converted B-24 Liberator, taking off near Norfolk, England. The way these flights worked was that the pilots had to fly the planes to a certain altitude, and then they had to set the bombs to go off and jump out, like I explained. After that, the plane could be remotely piloted to the destination so that the people manning the plane weren't getting hurt. So it wasn't like a kamikaze bomber that we saw with Japan. But being that this was the first flight of the whole operation, there's bound to be problems. So what happened was that Willie, the co-pilot, went to set the bombs, pulling the pin to do so. They flew for another 2 minutes, but the bombs exploded early, killing both Joseph Jr. and Willie. Their remains were never found, and both of them received mentions in the tablets of Cambridge American Cemetery and Memorial over in England, as well as the Navy Cross, the Air Medal, and the Purple Heart. Joseph Jr. was also granted an honorary headstone in Arlington, most likely based on who his family was, but that's just my opinion. And I know we've gone on a few tangents, I get that, but it's important to know and understand how these things affect people as they grow up, because this was the second tragedy in the Kennedy curse. And being that Ted was 12 and old enough to understand at this point what had happened to his older brother, it's important to talk about this. So,
and one thing. So I just reading through some of the notes real quick. The Operation Aphrodite was the Army Air Corps. We have to make the distinction that the Army Air Corps was who it was that was doing this.
mm-hmm.
The U.S. Navy had a similar project called Project Anvil. And it was the same thing in the Pacific Front. So there, and that's where you saw, that's where you seen JFK actually serving in the Solomon Islands and different places, was in the Pacific. So the U.S. Navy and the Air Corps, yeah, it's United States Army Air Force is what the official title was for Aphrodite.
Right.
But what's even crazier is, okay, these weren't small explosives either. They're 500 to 1,000 pound bombs. In those times, those were huge weapons. And there was enough explosive material, even if they flew 2 minutes and went off, they were less than a 2 football fields away. So even falling at terminal velocity, a human body would never be able to outrun the explosion and the shrapnel, which the shrapnel alone from an aluminum aircraft flying at an average of 349 knots, which is what those were flying, they wouldn't have flown but 200-300 yards. So that's very,
so I
very,
mean,
very
it went off pretty quickly.
Yeah, 2 minutes. That's nothing. You're really not flying all that far. And
and when you think about how quickly it could have gone, like it's almost like the Ocean Gate submarine. Just like that. They probably didn't even know what happened.
Well, and the thing is the shrapnel would have ripped their bodies to shreds.
Right.
So, and they say that it was 2 minutes, but what they don't tell you, and nobody really knows without really paying attention, nobody really knows whether or not they jumped out or even made it out of the aircraft at all.
Well, they do,
or where
because
that
they had a cameraman flying behind.
Oh, they did make it out.
They do, though, because they had a cameraman. They did not make it out. No. The bomb went off before they could jump.
See, and that's a point. Even if they had cleared it, though, even if they had gotten out of
they still would have died.
Where's that 2 minutes? And that's an important distinction, is where that 2 minutes was. Because if the 2 minutes was outside, they probably would have found the body. But if the 2 minutes was from when they released the yoke of the aircraft to disarm or to arm the bomb and then make their way to the exit, which from the bomb bay doors to the exit on those, you're talking less than 25 feet.
Right.
Or maybe less than 10 feet even. So that's
probably.
And so I just pulled up Operation Aphrodite, and I was figuring 500 pound because that's what they use conventionally. But this actually said their payload was 20,000 pounds of Torpex, which is similar to C4.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
This Torpex is originally the same stuff that eventually got modified down into what's now called C4.
Wow.
So they're in close proximity to 20,000 pounds worth of explosives.
Right.
High
Jeez.
danger close.
Man. Yeah, really. Good grief. And see, like, the other thing that is kind of bugging me is like, so these liberators, they weren't huge planes, so it's honestly probably closer to 10 feet for them to jump out, you know, not even 25 feet. I'm
So,
so
and chances are,
just the
even if
things
they left the
humanity
cockpit,
does, it's like insane.
if they left the cockpit and they got back to arm the devices, you're talking cockpit to the devices, maybe 10 feet. 10 feet beyond there is the back door of the Flying Fortress. So you're talking 20 feet from start to finish. But if they're trying to arm these explosives and they're playing, they could have armed many test explosives the same way. But one mistake, one hiccup in the air, and it's done wrong, and boom, you're done. So we don't. That's the thing that really people have to understand is we don't know what happened, and to truly see everything and know everything is impossible. Not even people that were in control of the mission
Right.
itself were knew it was what was going on.
Well, I know there's some people out there that know exactly what happened because the whole thing was caught on camera. They had a cameraman at the front of another plane that was flying with it because it was the first mission of Operation Aphrodite. But I don't know exactly where that footage is, if it's accessible by the public. Most likely it's not because it's military stuff, but it's out there. There's people who knew exactly what happened, but they're probably long dead. So there's that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's
But jumping
World War
back
II.
into
It's
the
a long time
regular,
ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll drop and let you jump right back into it.
So, so I'm unsure if Ted understood what his father and brother had supported during World War II, but he definitely comprehended death through war. And it, like we said earlier, it was a different time back then. And many of us attempt to shield our children nowadays from those kinds of things, hoping to just kind of preserve that innocence. And maybe we shouldn't. Who knows? But again, Ted's life went on, and by 1946, he was enrolled at Milton Academy in Boston. Not his father's alma mater high school of Boston Latin School, but still a good school. During his time at Milton Academy, he engulfed himself in many extracurriculars: drama, debate club, glee, tennis, and you can drop down Joseph's photo now. But most notably, Ted played football. All the Kennedy boys played football, but Ted was especially good at football. One educator noted that his ability to play football was, quote, absolutely fearless, end quote. And then his sophomore year, I believe, is when the next tragedy of the Kennedy curse happened. His older sister, Kathleen, who by this time had been married in England before her husband died in the war. There she is. Oh, that side. Yep, that side. So before her husband died in the war, she had been married, and she ended up in a plane crash over France. Now, it's important to note that Kathleen was not in the best standing with her family at this point. William Cavendish, Marquess of Hartington, was a Protestant, and the Kennedys were Catholic. They had a civil union due to the difference of religion. And we have a few wedding photos coming up, and Joseph Jr. was the only family member willing to attend the wedding. And unfortunately, tragedy struck Kathleen, and William was killed not even a month after Joseph Jr.'s death, shot by a German sniper. She went on to meet a married man, Viscount Milton, 8th Earl Fitzwilliam, named Peter, who also happened to be a Protestant. The two conspired for him to leave his wife so that they could marry, and Kathleen was threatened with disownment by her mother Rose if she went through with this. But in 1948, before she or her family could reconcile over the issue, both she and Peter were killed in a sheer instance of accident, the plane crash. And Joseph Kennedy Sr. was the only family member to attend her funeral. And to me, that is just sad. This makes me wonder why the rest of them weren't there. Was it because of her unconventional love life or due to other obligations? I'm not sure, but I am sure that losing 3 siblings, while not all of them dead, can have an immense impact on even a young high school man. I'm sure Ted was beside himself again with this loss, as he had been before with Rosemary and Joseph Jr., but he still carried on, garnering mostly B's and C's through high school, and graduated in 1950. And after that, he followed his brothers, John and Robert, to Harvard. And I know this is a touchy subject nowadays, but the Kennedys are a legacy family of Harvard. And whether you agree with legacy families or not, or legacy admissions or not, which I definitely don't, it still happens. Merit matters, friends. And Ted didn't necessarily have the merit to succeed at Harvard. So legacy admissions, getting mostly B's and C's, I don't think that would fly nowadays, trying to get into Harvard with mostly B's and C's. So, I mean, who knows, though?
Wait a second.
What'd you say?
Wait a second. But I thought if your name was Kennedy, you could get away with anything. Oh, wait, they could.
Well, that seems to be the case. No offense to the Kennedy family in any way, shape, or form, but powerful people end up getting their way most of the time. And yeah, it is what it is. And I know they're not the only legacy admissions family for all these Ivy League schools. But this to me, this bothered me. I'm like, bro. Yeah. But there's even more to it, okay? So, like, get this. Because he didn't really have the merit to succeed at Harvard, right? And this is evidenced by the fact that he almost immediately was failing Spanish class. And his answer was to cheat. He actually got expelled from Harvard because he decided to have another student take his Spanish exam for him. Like, what?
Well, if you
Why
have the
would
money
you
to
do
pay
that? You're in
somebody to
such a
cheat for
great
you, why not use it?
place. Because honor and merit, Shane. Honor and merit.
Well, I understand that, but we I think in the last episode we distinctly made the point that honor and merit were not something that they actually were very keen on in the Kennedy family. So he took a chip off the old block.
I know, and it's frustrating to me because, like, you know how, like, you're in history class as a kid, and these are the types of people and families that they have you almost learning admiration for and looking up to and aspiring to be. And then you find out all of this stuff when you become an adult, and you're like, oh my God, why did I look up to that person for so long? And it's not that I looked up to Ted like that, but
for my ROTC class, I actually had to do a report on the JFK issue and the JFK family and their military service. And the more I read about JFK, and I mean, JFK's, for all intents and purposes, was a decent man compared to a lot of the people in his family. But if you actually look at some, like, their service records, which in ROTC I was able to actually gain copies of all their ROTC records, or all their armed service records.
Oh, wow.
And forgive me, but it's only been like 16 years since I've actually seen the paper that I did on. So going through it and talking about the different things that, like, we saw of Robert and Joseph and the different ones that joined the service. I distinctly remember a lot of stuff being kind of merit wise. No, I mean, JFK, like, there's a lot of merit there in his service in the Solomon Islands and the different things that he did over there. But yeah, anyways, that was my 2 cents. When it comes to Harvard and hard work and merit, that's not something that the Kennedys were very well known for.
Right. Well, and it's kind of funny that you brought that up because after being expelled from Harvard, what did Ted do? Joined the army, of course, but not in any dangerous positions because Joseph Sr. used his political influence to get Ted the post of guard for the Supreme Headquarters Allied Command in Paris. He only served 2 years and came back in 1952, immediately applying again for Harvard. Yeah. So you'd think they'd have said no, but they let him back in. This is the benefit of being a legacy admission, my friends. And it's definitely unfair. It's a huge disadvantage for other people who do not have that kind of influence. So we can talk about that all day, every day, in relation to affirmative action and non-relation to affirmative action, which is also just as bad in my humble opinion. But merit and honor matter, folks. They do. Okay? But this time at Harvard, Ted applied himself a little bit more, although not enough to get A's. He rejoined the football team, which he'd been a part of the first time, and apparently he was so good that the Green Bay Packers tried to draft him in 1955. Yeah, so he was almost a Green Bay Packers player, which is crazy. He declined, of course, because Ted had bigger ambitions, law school, and eventually politics. After graduating Harvard in 1956 with a bachelor's in history and government, he went to study at the International Law School in The Hague, Netherlands, which is also the location of the International Court of Justice, which we actually recently saw in the news. He then tried to get into Harvard for a third time, hoping for a law school spot, but was denied, finally, due to his grades. Yep, you heard that right. He got in the first time with mediocre grades, but the second time they were too low. Instead, he attended the University of Virginia Law School with Bobby. And this caused controversy amongst the staff and students because they all knew of Ted's cheating escapades at Harvard, and admitting him felt like a stab to the code of honor that the school had so much pride in. But he attended nonetheless, receiving the same average grades of B's and C's, which was just his way at this point. And to be honest, I did the same thing in high school. So some of us it just happens, okay? Don't judge me. The Kennedy name and influence did help him, however, while there. He brought a ton of prominent people to campus to speak. But he also ended up gaining somewhat of a bad boy reputation. due to some reckless driving offenses. He would also apparently drive without a license. But he was a bachelor, and it would take his sister Jean's help to find a suitable match. In late 1957, Jean introduced him to Joan Bennett, and she was beautiful. Shane, if you want to throw her picture up, she was absolutely beautiful. I'm just like, wow. So Joan was a senior at Manhattan College. Ted and his family were there at the college because they had donated a gym to the school in memory of Kathleen, who died in the plane crash, remember? And they were there for the dedication of it. It's said that their courtship was extremely short before getting engaged, and even though Joan had reservations due to this, Joseph Sr. insisted the marriage happen. And so it did. On November 29th, 1958, and not long after, Ted joined the Massachusetts bar. Come 1960, John had announced his run for president, and Ted joined the campaign effort. And then she had their first child, Kara. You can see Kara. Oh, I keep pointing the wrong way. You can see Kara in this picture. She's really cute and little. She's long past now. But so then Ted went on to be a manager for his brother's campaign in the western half of the country. Bobby took the eastern half of the country, okay? Ted took this opportunity very seriously. He learned to fly airplanes, took on some extreme sports like ski jumping, and won over Democrat delegates left and right. He actually did a great job because his work actually helped win the nomination for John at the 1960 Democratic National Convention. Ted continued to work on his brother's presidential campaign, and John won the presidency November 8th. There he is. JFK. Oh my gosh. This way. Yep. I'm going to get this down, guys. I promise. This left the Senate seat that John had occupied open, but Ted wasn't old enough yet. He would have to wait until he was 30. So apparently John asked the Massachusetts governor to appoint their friend, Benjamin Smith, to fill the seat until Ted was eligible. Yeah. So they had a friend take over John's seat in order to wait for Ted to be able to take it over. Do you see why America looked at this family as almost like royalty? It's, yeah, power and influence, everybody. So this is absurd because it should have been put to a vote from the people, but it wasn't. In the meantime, while he was waiting for his eligibility to take over John's Senate seat, Ted began working for the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office in Massachusetts, and in 1961, he had a son, Edward Kennedy Jr., also known as Ted. And there he is again with Kara and Joan and his dad. Apparently, Ted's salary with this assistant DA position was literally only $1, and I'm not exaggerating by that. I'm not sure why either, but it is what it is. Apparently, he was extremely tough on crime. He began traveling the world during this time as well to educate himself on foreign policy and ways of living. In late 1961, Ted traveled through Latin America, visiting 9 different countries, even meeting with Lachlan Curry in Colombia. Now, Lachlan Curry was the chief economic advisor for FDR. Remember, we talked about FDR and his relationship with the Kennedy family last episode. And according to FBI reports, Lachlan was possibly a Soviet spy. And I guess that during his time as FDR's chief economic advisor, his actions and writings in May of 1941 supporting tighter sanctions on Japan and China are said to have caused the attack on Pearl Harbor that December. So I also learned in my research that he was one of the lone negotiators for the creation of the World Bank in the 1940s, which is also crazy scary. Yeah. It's also suspected to this day that Laughlin, like I said, was a spy for the Soviet Union. This is evidenced by decoded messages apprehended by American intelligence, as well as testimony by Soviet defectors. So you can imagine what Ted's meeting with him would look like to the American public and the American government in general. In addition, it's also stated that he was frequenting, Ted, not Laughlin, Ted was frequenting brothels and bordellos throughout the tour, which would become a extreme point of contention between him and his wife Joan. But regardless, 1962 rolled around and Ted began his campaign for his brother's old Senate seat. But he had opposition. Massachusetts State Attorney General Edward J. McCormick, Jr. Edward was more liberal than Ted and had major support from the left-wingers. Edward even knew about Ted's cheating days at Harvard and made sure the public knew about it too. And though this happened, and Ted's campaign was fairly unoriginal, recycling his brother's campaign slogan even, and we have a picture of his campaign slide. Oh, here's Edward, his opposition. And then his campaign poster, the slogan was, "He can do more for Massachusetts," which was the same slogan that John had used about a decade before. And that's, to me, is insane. To me, that's unoriginal. I don't know. At this point, there was some distaste among the still won the seat. Edward, his opposition, spoke out against this during their debates, stating that the United States Senate seat should be merited, not inherited. There's that word again. Merit. Merit and honor, my friends. And he's absolutely right. But our system hasn't worked that way in a very long time. And this is a pretty prime example. This would be the first of many terms in the Senate for Ted, 9 to be exact, spanning 47 years, one of the longest serving senators ever. I think he's the third longest serving. Just 1 year into his Senate seat, the fourth tragedy of the Kennedy curse came to pass: the assassination of John F. Kennedy. We all know the story. The President and First Lady Jackie, and trigger warning here because I did choose some pretty grotesque photos. The President and First Lady Jackie were driving in a procession through Dallas. He was shot and killed, landing in the lap of Jackie. By the end of the day, Vice President Lyndon Johnson was sworn into the presidency, a shock-ridden and blood-soaked Jackie Kennedy standing beside him. It was an aide to the Senate that told Ted, and later his brother Bobby broke the news of John's passing. The nation fell into mourning. The young president, practically American royalty, was gone. And then, the next year, the Kennedy curse almost took Ted himself. In June of 1964, Ted was on a passenger plane going from Washington to Massachusetts. There was bad weather, and the small plane crashed near Southampton. Unfortunately, Ted suffered some extensive injuries. He had a punctured lung with internal bleeding. broken bones and ribs, and a horrible back injury that he would feel for the rest of his life. He was incapacitated for months in the middle of a Senate campaign, which his wife, Joan, took over, winning re-election for him while he recovered in the hospital. And I can't think of another senator who's won an election from a hospital bed. So there's that. When he finally returned to the Senate,
we do know somebody who ran a campaign from their basement.
Who?
Only is for president.
Who?
Joe Biden. Joe Biden ran for president. What?
He didn't run it from his basement.
How many campaign spots did he do in 2020?
I'm not sure.
Seven?
That's it?
All the rest of it were videos. Yeah, Joe Biden, all the rest of his campaign spots were done from his campaign. Even the DNC was done remote. It was all done from his house.
I don't remember that. I don't remember that.
But yeah, I saw that in there, and I was just like, oh, I have to jump in here just before we got on for the next one. That we wouldn't see that again until 2020 election cycle. And Joe Biden, who was a former U.S. senator, vice president, and then ran for president, and most of his campaign run was from his house due to the bug that was flying around, a 2020 bug. I'll let you continue.
Oh, that's right. I didn't even think about that. Huh. That's funny. So when Ted finally returned to the Senate in 1965, he had to use a cane, and we showed you guys the picture of him and his dad both walking with their canes right here, yeah. But that didn't stop him. He began working fairly hard, even succeeding in changing the decades-long immigration ideology of encouraging only people from Europe that had plagued our system since the 20s. This was done by passing the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which changed the entirety of the immigration system, and it made it no longer discriminatory, at least from a government standpoint. That's not saying anything about the stigma socially or the people themselves, okay? Just from a government standpoint, it was no longer discriminatory. He even created the National Teachers Corps, a program that helped boost teachers in poverty-stricken areas. In January of 1968, Ted took a trip to Vietnam. This trip really changed his perception of the war over there because he came back pushing America to leave the war effort. Around this same time, his remaining brother, Bobby, was announcing his candidacy for president in the 1968 election, though Ted encouraged him not to challenge President Johnson. Bobby didn't listen, however, and went into full campaign mode by March. He had hired many people to work on the campaign, including a group of women called the Boiler Room Girls. Ted worked hard to garner political support for Bobby, despite his apprehension to the bid. And by June 4th, Bobby had won the coveted California and South Dakota primaries. But just after midnight, everything was shattered. Bobby had been shot by a man named Sirhan Sirhan, in the Embassy Ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Bobby had just finished a speech and was walking away from the podium when Sirhan shot him as he entered a hallway leading to a kitchen. 1 day later, Bobby was pronounced dead. An aide to the Kennedys later recounted the sight of Ted, seeing his brother lying in the hospital bed. Quote, "I have never ever, nor do I expect ever, to see a face more in grief." And this was the 5th tragedy in the Kennedy curse. As Ted delivered the eulogy at Bobby's funeral, he said, quote, "My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. To be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it. Those of us who loved him and who take him to his rest today pray that what he was to us and what he wished for others will someday come to pass for all the world." End quote. And life went on for those who were left. Ted became a kind of surrogate father for his 13 nieces and nephews, was pegged as a potential frontrunner for the 1972 presidential election, and was voted in as the Senate Majority Whip, the youngest senator to ever do so. And though he was being pushed to run for president, he truly didn't want to. He said once, quote, "I know that I'm going to get my ass shot off one day, and I don't want to," end quote. And he would continue to receive death threats the rest of his career. Still, he did almost feel it was a duty to his family and brothers that would require him to continue entertaining the idea, though fate would step in before his campaign could really even launch. And because of this, June 18th, this day, June 18th, 1969, while 3 small beings of Earth made their way to the moon, Ted hosted a party on Chappaquiddick Island for the Boiler Room Girls. And tragedy would strike again. And whether it was through the fault of Ted or some unknown force, a beautiful, intelligent, and vivacious Miss Mary Jo Kopechne would be dead. And Ted would have a lot of explaining to do about the events surrounding it. And this is where we will end this episode. Next time, we will dive into Mary Jo and her life and how she got into politics, and we'll get into the events of that fateful night. So, there we have it. Part 2. Part 2. If you guys would like to follow any of our social media platforms, we have a TikTok, North of Richmond. I believe we have links. We have a Beacons link that we'll start including into these posts so that y'all can find it. And yeah, Shane, do you have anything to say before we end the stream?
Not really. I mean, like you said before, there's going to be a link in whatever post that you guys are coming on, whether it's going to be YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're seeing this episode, or if you're listening to it on audio, there's a link on all your audio platforms that will be included in the description of the episode itself to follow us on all the other platforms. So please hit that like button, hit the share button, and definitely hit that subscribe button, especially if you're on Spotify, if you're on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, or Apple Podcast, sorry. Because that's really how we're going to build this and actually get this out.
Yeah. Yeah. And for those of you listening on just audio, our extended video versions will be up on YouTube. We're also working on getting them on Rumble. So for any of you who would rather listen visually, so you can see all of the pictures we're throwing up on screen and you can see us on screen, you can do that on YouTube. And that link will also be in our Beacons link. So yeah.
Yeah, and
There we go. We will see you guys next week.